I'm Sal.
I'm Beth.
We're the brewery lovers. And this is a really special evening because we're happy to welcome Tara Nurin, a wonderful author, and author of A Woman's Place is in the Brewhouse, A Forgotten History of Alewives, Brewsters, Witches, and CEOs. You hold up the book. There it is. We'll put up a graphic. We'll put up a real graphic on the cover. Welcome, Tara.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank
We really
you.
appreciate it. We know how busy you are.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Congratulations on the book.
Thanks.
It needed to be written, obviously.
Thank you.
And we're both of the opinion that you were totally the right person to write it. It's really well written. It's a fun read. You're very funny. And we're blown away by your level of research and all the stuff you did and all the places you went.
It was so comprehensive.
So how long did you work on it, actually?
A little more than a year, about 15 months. But because I've been writing about women in beer for about 16 years now, that's really when I started my research. And actually, because I started sipping off my dad's Budweiser when I was 2 or 3, we will skip over that math, but it's been a long time.
And how did the timing of this fit in with COVID? And that must have made it harder.
Yeah, because you were doing a lot of traveling.
I was. It's a totally different book because of COVID. I don't know what it would have been had it not been COVID, but it wouldn't have been this. When COVID hit, yeah, like everybody else, I got grounded. And I had to really do all of my research on the phone and on the internet, which made it in some ways harder because we all know you can't trust much on the internet, especially when it comes to people who are pretending to be beer experts. What?
Like me.
Yeah, well, you go way back. I'm sure you know what you're talking about.
In spite of all that, you did a phenomenal job. We really loved it.
Thanks.
And for the uninitiated, I mean, I knew that women always brewed because I've been a beer nerd for many, many years. But for someone who's just coming into this, explain how it was really the women's domain, and then the follow-up is what changed. You know, how did it all of a sudden become a guy thing?
Yeah. I've got to figure out a way to answer that so that I leave people hanging. Like, you want the rest of the story? Buy the book.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding because it is really important to me that people do know the story. So throughout most of human civilization, we have relied on beer as our staple beverage, and that is morning, noon, and night, and that includes infants, toddlers, like me sipping off my dad's Budweiser, which I was probably doing because I knew I wasn't supposed to, as opposed to relying on beer for my caloric and some of my nutritional. I'm trying to think of fancy words and I'm too distracted. It's just not
There's
working.
lots of fancy words in the book.
Read the book for fancy words. Thank you. So people didn't really drink other things throughout most of time and space for reasons that I'm not going to go into here. And so making beer was a kitchen chore. And so who gets to do all the kitchen chores? Women. So brewing beer was women's work in civilizations from ancient Egypt to colonial Williamsburg to Northern Europe and the Iron Age. Women are doing it. But in every single situation, I mean, it's with staggering 100% consistency. Whenever the forces of economics, politics, and or religion would creep in to the civilization, then that's when men would take over and women wouldn't get to do the brewing anymore. And often that's when it became profitable or, technological or scientific, I'm going to air quote, progress made it almost impossible for women to keep doing it because, the capital that was required would be out of reach, etc. So we see that over and over and over. And it even happened here in the United States in about the 17th, 18th century.
Well, one of the things I love about the book is it's a history lesson of women in beer, but it's also a history lesson in beer. Because you go everywhere. You're talking about so many different styles, stuff that most people have never even heard of, like chicha and the beer that's made with saliva, basically.
Yep, in South America,
South America, And then what I was gonna ask you is, like, the world's oldest brewery claims Weihenstephan 1040, right? They claim is when
1040,
they
yep.
officially started. That seems like a long time ago, but it really isn't. I mean, the male patriarchy was already established at that point. So women were going to be shut out at that point. It's not like it was a new phenomenon. But then you mentioned that it also happened in ancient Egypt. Am I right?
As far as this pattern that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, it happened everywhere. I mean,
Right.
it happened in ancient Mesopotamia. It might have happened in hunter-gatherer societies before we even formed civilizations.
Before there was a record.
Right.
Um,
It's almost parallel to the restaurant business. You know, cooking was always women's domain, and then when it became a business and profitable, it became like all the famous chefs in the world all of a sudden were men. That's what
exactly
I thought.
Right.
It was a very similar parallel.
Yeah, I mean, I am only beginning to learn about the patriarchy and its origins, and really kind of understand how we have gotten to where we are today. Obviously, there's a lot we don't know, but you know, my trusted sources make the argument that men and women started becoming unequal, with men dominating in these hunter-gatherer societies, basically when men realized that they were fathering the children that women were giving birth to. And I won't go down a rabbit's hole in that, but yeah, you guys have been ruling stuff for a while. and as we know, like, people who have power do everything they can not to give it up. So,
always.
you know, within each civilization, you know, I joke, it's not like overnight, you know, women stopped brewing and men were, you know, making, you know, putting their feet on women's faces. But yeah, sometimes over a couple hundred years, it just evolved that men and women became less and less and less equal. And same in the brewing industry. You know, it could take a couple hundred years.
So again, really a really fun read for me because I'm a history buff. So all this like ancient beer history, but then a really well done history of American craft beer. And what I was going to ask you is, give us some examples of some of your favorite invisible women in American craft beer. For example, Susie Stern Dennison, for example, Rhonda Kalman, to a lesser degree, Mariah Cala-Jones, because you correct me if I'm wrong. We were under the impression that Mariah was kind of okay with Sam being in front of the camera all the time.
I think that's kind of how they worked it out. So Mariah Cala-Jones is Sam's wife and co-founder of Dogfish Head. She helped grow the company behind the scenes. She's still there working for Boston Beer, which now, as your viewers I'm sure know, owns Dogfish Head. So yeah, I mean, just because they were invisible doesn't mean that in some cases it hasn't been a sort of maybe conscious or unconscious choice. But there are a lot of women who really have not chosen to not get the credit. And
exactly.
They haven't. And you mentioned two of my faves. I mean, I guess I can't say any of them are my faves because they all are genuinely, but you mentioned Susie Stern and you mentioned Rhonda Coleman. So real quick, Rhonda Coleman, speaking of Boston Beer, Jim Koch brought her over on from a previous job where they'd worked together on day one of opening Boston Beer. And so Rhonda and Jim pounded the streets every single day trying to teach publicans in Boston why they should pay more to sell this fuller flavored beer. So Jim does a good job of keeping Rhonda in the record. So she's a little more visible still than some of the women are. But Susie, for instance, I love Susie as a person. I just love her story. And so Susie co-founded New Albion Brewing with Jack McAuliffe and another woman, Jane Zimmerman. Susie and Jane put in all the money for Jack to open New Albion as the first ground-up craft brewery in America post-Prohibition. Jane kind of pieced out after a year to pursue a different career. Susie stuck with Jack, brewing, running the business, selling, doing everything, in a small startup that everybody does. When they closed 6 years after they opened, which would have been around 1982, they closed. they both left the beer industry. Jack was kind of brought back out of obscurity, and people know his name now. There have been beers named after him, etc. No one ever really did the research or spoke up to say, well, hey, there were two women there with you from before day one. Where are they? And Susie's just got like such an awesome outlook on life that she's not, upset that she didn't get credit or anything. But since she read the book, I actually had the pleasure of meeting her finally in person, COVID, a couple weeks ago in Seattle. And I gave her copies of the book, and she read it, and she just keeps emailing me like, thank you so much. We finally feel seen. I hoped she didn't mind, but I reached out to this other woman in the book to connect from like way back, also in the 80s. And yeah, I mean, for some of these women who date back to the early days of craft beer and whose names we don't know, they are really getting visibility for the first time. And that's probably the most meaningful part of this book for me.
And that's why I said it really needed to be written before. I wasn't kidding.
Thank you.
I really loved that there was a couple children of brewing couples or brewing teams that said, thank you for asking about my mom.
My mom, yeah.
Because they knew that both their parents were putting in 180 hours a week, and it was the dad that was getting all the credit, or at least the one that was visible.
The other thing I noticed is that when people found out what you were up to, they started volunteering names, including a lot of men that you encountered. Like, oh yeah, there was a woman here. Like they just didn't think about it until you gave them an excuse to think about it.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? A lot of the women who were early craft beer pioneers didn't think about it either at the time. I had to ask those tired old questions like, well, what was it like being a woman in beer in 1987? And, were you the only one in the bathroom? And how did people treat you? And did you and the other woman like go to conferences and hang out? And to a person, they all were like, we were busy. And it didn't even occur to us, just doing the day-to-day grind. I mean, it's grueling starting a craft brewery now. It was way more grueling back then. And, I had a couple of the women I asked say, well, I'd heard the name Carol Stout, or I'd heard the name Melly Pullman, and maybe we like met at a conference or something, but we didn't like go into the corner and gossip or anything.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Like you said, they were just running their businesses. That's what they had to do.
They were starting something new.
So how do you feel it's gotten better for people like, say, the Yingling sisters compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago?
That's interesting. Not a lot of people bring them up. You mean as women taking over or running a bigger craft brewery now?
My question is, do you think they'll have an easier time being taken seriously than Carol Stout did?
Yes.
That's my question.
That's a good point. Gender aside, obviously Yingling is, an established name now. So you walk around and introduce yourself as Wendy Yingling, at least in our area.
It rings a bell.
Oh, can you give me free beer? I'm sure she hears it all the time. But you know what? Like, and I'm not personal friends with the Yingling sisters. I've met, I think, all of them at this point at least once. So I don't know like what their day-to-day experiences really are, like how they feel. But I would bet that they still, even now, have encountered some resistance that still pervades everywhere to this day. It's just, I don't know. We're a little more used to seeing women in the brew house now, and we are accepting of craft beer. So we don't have this double thing like, wait, what kind of beer? And like, who are you?
Well, I love the story about Judy Ashworth telling when the guy came in and said, I need to see the owner. And she said, take a seat, and made him wait 45 minutes.
Judy.
Awesome.
Judy's one of the most fun characters.
If for no other reason, buy this book for the Judy Ashworth stuff. Oh my God, it was so much fun.
I hope to see her next week. I'm going to tell her you said that, actually, and I need to email her. That makes me think of that. Yeah, Judy owned a bar in the 80s, and she was one of the very first, like probably one of the first 2 or 3 craft beer bars in the country. And she started things that we still do today that, we just take for granted, like Meet the Brewer nights, or like Christmas in July, or like no
And no
smoking in the
smoking.
bar.
No smoking,
Yeah.
right? No Budweiser.
That's huge.
That was big.
No crap on
Budweiser.
tap. Like
Yeah.
she did all that stuff first, like temperature controlled lines. No one knows who she is. Some home brewers in California know her.
No, and I'm really glad that you introduced me to her as well, because I didn't know her either.
Thanks.
But
yeah.
I mean, enormous changes we've experienced. Like we went on we don't cruise really, but we've done it a few times. The first time we cruised, when I went on a cruise ship, it was in 1997. They had this massive wine list, every kind of wine you could think of: French, California, German. They had like 4 beers, industrial,
All
light,
lagers.
industrial light, lighter, lighter, industrial. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, what is wrong with these people? And these are professional food and beverage people.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we're scheduled to interview Julia Hertz, who of course has done a lot with food pairings. But give us your thoughts. You've been in this game a little while. How has it changed for you? Especially, we'd also like to hear you tell us about your experiences of being not taken seriously as a female writer.
I think I'll answer it in 2 parts and 6 subsections.
Now I'm taking notes.
You talk about beer not being on menus, and I'm guessing that you're thinking of that in part because I do talk about 2 women who have been very instrumental, first in the 1960s and 70s, and then starting in the 80s, getting beer on restaurant menus, and how the front of house person never wanted to hear it. He'd be like, we've got 2 beers already. What do we need more for? And so they'd sneak around to the kitchen and drink good beer with the chefs, because at least the chefs, even if they didn't have any power to bring beer in, they at least appreciated it. So I've always been very interested in watching how craft beer is perceived and how it's grown. I mean, you 2 know, you've been following this, chasing this rabbit, whatever, chasing this Mad Hatter for that many decades. So it's been gratifying to see the evolution. Like, I can go to Puerto Rico now, for instance, in the middle of the island in the jungle, and drink some pretty shockingly amazing craft beer. I can tell you, as far as being a journalist, pitching beer stories to magazines, it was like, no one cared. Oh, people cared for like 18 months, and then spirits got cool, and no one cares anymore. So I'm talking about like high-end food and drink magazines. So if they have the finger on what their readers want, their readers don't want beer anymore, and like they only did for a second. As for my own experiences, I'm surprised I don't get the question more often. I really haven't encountered much discrimination at all that I'm aware of. I used to be pretty blind to that kind of thing. I'm a Gen Xer, so I like to think, we just like chortle and brush a lot of stuff off that like now people would be like, hey, that was a microaggression, or hey, like that felt a little red flaggy and aggressive to me, but I don't. So whatever was happening before I noticed, I can't really speak to, and I really don't think it's happening now.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. And thank you for being candid about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to say one thing, like, because it does happen, just because it's not, I don't experience it. Like, I am in no way denying its existence, because it happens all the time. I wonder if part of the reason I'm not experiencing it quite as much is that at this point in my career, I tend to be interviewing like the owners, the people who maybe are a little more sophisticated and have more media savvy. So either they're like, enlightened more, and don't hold, discriminatory views, or if they do, they're smart enough not to share them.
What's the cat's name? Let's get to the important stuff.
This is Emmy, and
Hi,
I've been
Emmy.
traveling so much, she's gotten like zero attention in a while.
Well, and also there's so many female journalists. Like when Beth is a retired pharmacist. When she started, well, tell about where's the pharmacist? I want to talk to the pharmacist.
Yeah, I was 23 and short and behind the counter, and mostly men that would come in would say, I'd like to speak to the pharmacist. And I'd say, I am the pharmacist. And they'd look, isn't there a real pharmacist here? They wanted somebody who looked like Dr. Welby, and that wasn't me. It's been there forever, no matter what field you're in. I think women breaking into areas that are relatively new, it's a challenge. But I love that you tackle the diversity and inclusion, and that you touched on the whole, very sad Me Too. And it's really prompted Sal and I. We spent a lot of time in the car, and we've been discussing, and this might be your next book. Most of my friends don't drink beer, and only women that I've met at the homebrew store do I know that homebrew. I don't have any friends that I grew up with or went to college with that homebrew. And we were just bouncing it back and forth. Why is that? Is it going into STEM areas? We just weren't groomed for that? Or is it nature?
Yeah.
Why do my friends drink wine and cocktails, and I'm the one that says, but can we stop and pick up a 4-pack?
Yeah.
A 4-pack of something really good.
I bet. Well, I'm excited that you're talking to Julia tomorrow, because she and I have talked a lot in the past, and even since she was named to her new position as executive director of the American Homebrewers Association, about how to broaden the appeal to women. So I think obviously you'll have a super interesting conversation with her about that. Well, everyone points, the most facile answer is, oh, well, beer is advertised as a man's drink. And I mean, it's maybe the cliche answer, but at least if I had to point to one thing that really nailed it home, as far as separating women in contemporary America, or at least 20th century America, from beer, it might have been the advertising campaigns of the 50s. And I find the chapter that I wrote about advertising in the 20th century to be one of the most interesting for me. And you're nodding and smiling, Beth. Was there any particular thing?
I remember those ads that you were just, the girls in bikinis, and
of course
the St. Pauli girl. And it was obviously not aimed at me.
Right.
So, but I found craft beer anyway. But
what surprised you? What was the thing that surprised you the most in this experience of all the things you learned?
The consistency with the consistency with which the patriarchy continues to suppress women. I mean, my favorite example is, you read about the men in Iron Age Estonia, I think it was, in some of the villages where the men were actually the ones brewing. They did not allow women into their caves or whatever where they were brewing, because they blamed the women for sour beer, not, their own ineptitude at brewing, of course. Well, so you fast forward 1,000 years and you get to the 1960s, and the woman Jerry I talk about, who was a very high level scientist, QA, working with all women in the lab for this legacy brewery in Minnesota, and they were not allowed to go fetch their own samples because the men thought their yeast would ruin the beer.
Wow.
I mean, and that was 40, 50 years ago now, but we are looking at 1,000-year span where the same stereotype holds true.
It's incredible.
And that's what surprised me the most. God, the more things, here we are.
The more they stay the same.
Yeah.
Nothing new under the sun.
Exactly.
Tell us about, I know you're busy and we're going to let you go because you have a million things to do, but tell us about Pink Boots.
Oh, you mean describe what it is?
Yeah, the Pink Boots Society, for someone who's never heard of it.
Because I sincerely have seen Pink Boots in breweries. For example, at the Seed
in Atlantic City.
Oh, Amanda wears Pink Boots
are sitting right there.
It's right there, yeah.
I never realized that there was a whole society that is promoting women in brewing.
Okay. Oh, cool. Okay. Nice shout out to Amanda at the Seed too. And Sean. Um,
And Sean.
so
His boots are brown.
okay,
Saying.
I'm not sure if they make
I don't know
men's
if
in
that's a
pink.
society.
Yeah, but wait, you've only seen the boots on the floor. You haven't seen them on the
On
people.
this-
You don't know.
I saw the boots on the feet, and I saw the feet on the skateboard.
Oh, you did.
But
Okay.
it's okay.
Well, so the Pink Boots Society is an international nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering and educating women in the beverage alcohol industry. It started in 2007. Just for women in beer, and about 2 years ago it expanded to include women in all the alcoholic beverages. It was founded by a woman named Terry Ferendorf, who wrote the foreword to my book because she's the one who told me I had to write the book. Sal, she actually said the same thing that you did, which was here. Well, I was on the phone with her in like 2016. She said, Tara, no one's written a book about the history of women in beer yet, and you need to write it. You're the one. So I was like, oh, shoot. Yeah, I guess I could write a book, couldn't I? Other people do it, and they're not professional writers. So what excuse do I have? So
We're glad it was you.
thank you. Thank you. I'm actually about to have dinner with her tomorrow in Oregon, and she's like beside herself excited about how the book's doing. It is like it's like her baby too, actually. But yeah, so the Pink Boots Society gives scholarships, and we do scholarships to brewing type programs and distilling now, also cider making, etc. And so a lot of scholarships, a lot of networking, a lot of educational events, and there are chapters around the world.
Was this your favorite project so far? Or if not, what was your favorite project?
You mean in my career?
This book.
In your writing career, yeah.
It was the biggest.
Again, congratulations. It's a huge
Thank you.
accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book needed to be written. I'm really glad that I have the privilege to have been the conduit for it. Because then I get to like see the reaction.
And it makes a great Christmas gift, by the way.
Thank you. It does.
Makes a good
I'm about
holiday
to go
gift.
to I'm about to go to the West Coast and promote it for another 3 weeks, and then I'm gonna come home and not leave my bedroom until
Yes.
February.
That would be good. Yeah, because writing the book was hard enough, right? Now you have to do this with 1,000 people. So
So buy the book. It'll make me feel like it was worth it.
yes, it's absolutely worth it. So we're sitting for the BJCP in January.
Nice.
So we want to know your tips. That's really the only reason we set up this interview, is because we want to hear your tips. We want you to
It's
help us pass the
isovaleric.
BJCP.
That's
kidding.
the tip. Isovaleric.
Isovaleric, yeah, gym socks. I remember that one, gym socks.
Exactly.
This beer does not smell like gym socks.
Nobody got that one right in my exam. Yeah, I don't know what my tips are. Just study.
That's what we all we've been doing, literally.
Yeah.
We have our
I don't
little
have any
smartphone.
We spend our evenings
Yeah.
with Jen Blair.
Yeah, Jen Blair.
Oh, is she
Yeah,
studying for it too, or
not-
is she
not-
teaching it?
That's a
Not physically, but she was really nice enough to put up a series of YouTube videos that just take you through the first what did 26?
26 categories.
The first 26 categories. Like
Oh,
a
wow.
lot of detail, and it's really great. I mean, I can't wait to write her a thank you email, because it's been really wonderful.
Oh, that's cool. So
Yeah.
you'll have to let me know when you pass. I'm sure you will.
I hope so.
Maybe I will come to Central Jersey and we can have. That makes me want to say pork roll for some reason. Like
We could have pork roll. We would love to
Central
buy you
Jersey-
a beer and a pork roll.
with the beer and the pork roll. So
Yeah.
let's
Well,
do
and
that
we're-
when you.
In the
when you
spring,
pass.
we're hitting the road full time. We're going to be full time, brewery to brewery, coast to coast. So we can
Oh
come to you.
wow! And
We
what
can
will
come
you
to
be? What's your goal?
Oh, it's for the YouTube channel. The goal is
Okay.
to visit the goal is to visit the best breweries we can find in the lower 48. Not all of them, because there's no way we wouldn't live long enough,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
that's a really good problem compared to 1985, when this whole thing started, or whenever that was.
There would have been a lot of driving between breweries.
I'm wondering, like, what are some cities that people might not think of as being craft beer meccas that you're really excited to check out that actually are craft beer meccas?
Good
I'm so
question.
happy to have the craftbeer.com website
Yeah.
that has the map and it shows you where all the breweries are.
Okay.
So I just sit and look at it and I go here, here, here,
Mhm.
here. I don't even know what the cities are. I just know how many breweries are in each one.
Mhm.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
a fun project.
It's
It's a
gonna
good
be
project.
it's gonna be crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're looking forward to it. But as I said, a great read. Even if you don't know anything about beer, and if you don't think you're not interested in beer, if you're interested in women in the workplace, this is a book that you must have. So definitely put it on your holiday gift list, both for yourself and for your friends and family. And Tara, we can't thank you enough. It was such a pleasure.
Pleasure to meet you.
So nice to meet you
Congratulations. It was
too.
such a fun read.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm shocked that we haven't run across one another's paths before, but I'm happy that we have now.
Yes, me too. I had the same thought.
Yep.
Cool.
All right.
All right.
Buy you a beer someday.
We'll buy you beer and safe travels.
Thank you. Likewise.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.